The morning of March 17th, 1945, began like the breath before a storm, still, gray and heavy with tension. Along the western bank of the Rhine, the town of Remagen smoldered in the cold spring air, its ruins marked by smoke and the dull thud of distant artillery. The Ludendorff Bridge, once an iron spine stretching proudly over the river, now trembled under the weight of men, tanks, and the grinding machinery of war. For 10 days, it had been the Allies' unlikely gift, captured intact when every other bridge across the Rhine had been blown to rubble. But today, it was dying. Captain Karl Timmerman of the 9th Armored Division stood near the western approach, his helmet rim streaked with soot. He watched engineers scurry like ants across the steel lattice, tightening bolts, reinforcing cables, shouting through the clatter. The bridge groaned with every crossing. Beneath it, the Rhine surged, cold and merciless, swollen by the late winter melt. "Sir," an engineer shouted, stumbling through the mud, "we've got cracks in the east pier again." "She's shifting." Timmerman turned, eyes narrowing through the haze. "Get Colonel Heilmann on the line. I want status on those cables now." But there was no saving the Ludendorff. The bridge had been hammered by constant shelling since the day it fell into American hands. Luftwaffe planes had made run after run, desperate to destroy what Hitler himself called an intolerable disgrace. Engineers patched holes, replaced girders, and reinforced beams. But the old German structure, built during the First World War, had taken all it could bear. By noon, the tremors were worse. On the eastern bank, engineers of the 276th Combat Battalion fought to clear debris under the bridge, working waist-deep in freezing water. Sergeant Joseph Delaney, a wiry man from Ohio, glanced up to see a line of soldiers trudging across with heavy packs. The entire span quivered. "Jesus," he muttered, wiping grime from his face. "You feel that?" "She's talking to us." Private Charlie Knox, beside him, laughed, though his voice cracked. "Talking?" "She's screaming, Joe." They both looked up as another groan rippled through the steel. A sharp ping echoed, the sound of a bolt snapping free. Then another. Up on the deck, a jeep lurched as the boards beneath it sagged. Timmerman ran forward, waving his arms. "Clear the bridge! Everybody off, now!" The shout carried across the river, but the noise drowned it. Trucks still rolled forward, engines growling. Men didn't understand until the bridge shifted with a sound like thunder. For a moment, it was as if time froze. The central span lifted, twisted, then folded upon itself. Steel shrieked and cables whipped through the air. A black cloud of dust and rust erupted as girders split apart. Then came the crash. The center of the Ludendorff Bridge collapsed into the Rhine with a roar that shook the valley. Men screamed as they were thrown into the freezing water, gear dragging them down. Vehicles toppled like toys, vanishing beneath the current. Shattered iron beams jutted upward like the ribs of a drowned beast. Timmerman dropped to the ground, covering his head as debris rained down. When he looked up, the eastern half of the bridge was gone. Smoke and spray filled the air. The only sounds were the river and the faint cries for help. "Medic! Get the medics down here!" he shouted. A team rushed past him carrying ropes and stretchers. Engineers threw lifelines into the water, hauling survivors toward the bank. The current was brutal. It spun men around, pulling them under the shattered remains of the structure. Lieutenant Earl Hoffman, soaked to the bone, dragged himself onto a broken pontoon and looked back toward the chaos. "We lost her," he murmured. "God damn it, we lost her." By nightfall, the reports began to come in. 28 men dead, 63 wounded, dozens more injured. The bridge that had carried the first Allied troops into the heart of Germany was gone. At headquarters in Remagen, General William Hogue of the 9th Armored Division stared at the map spread across the table. His cigarette burned to ash between his fingers. "We knew it couldn't last forever," he said quietly. "But the timing." Beside him, Colonel Heilman nodded grimly. "We've still got 15,000 men on this side. Armor, supplies, medical units. They're stuck here unless we build another way." Hogue looked up. "How long would it take to put a pontoon across?" Heilman hesitated. "Under normal conditions? A day, maybe 2. But the current's fast, and Jerry's still shelling the river. It'd be suicide to start without cover." Hogue stubbed out his cigarette, his expression hardening. "Then we do it anyway." Outside, the Rhine glimmered in the fading light, its surface rippling over the wreckage of the fallen bridge. Across the water, German guns flashed from the hills above Erpel. The war wasn't over, not by a long shot. The Allies had clawed their way across the Rhine for the first time. But now the river threatened to stop them cold. That night, the engineers gathered near the bank, studying the currents by lantern light. Major James B. Anderson, commander of the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion, crouched beside the water, running a gloved hand through the icy flow. He could feel its strength, the relentless pull. "If we don't get another crossing up fast," he said to his men, "we'll lose momentum. The Germans will regroup, and every day we wait costs lives." A young lieutenant adjusted his helmet. "Sir, the current's pushing 12 knots. We'll never hold a pontoon steady long enough to anchor." Anderson looked up, his face illuminated by the flicker of a match as he lit a cigarette. "Then we make it hold." He glanced across the dark river where flashes of artillery still lit the sky. "Tomorrow, before dawn, we start building. I don't care if they shell us all day. We get that bridge up." The men exchanged wary looks. They were combat engineers, not infantry, but they'd been in the thick of it since Normandy. They'd built roads under sniper fire, repaired tracks while tanks burned around them. Still, the Rhine was something else, broad, unpredictable, and alive with danger. In the distance, the ruins of the Ludendorff Bridge smoked faintly, its twisted skeleton rising from the water like a monument to desperation. The wind carried the metallic tang of burning oil and the faint scent of cordite. Captain Timmerman stood on the bank, staring at the wreckage. He'd been the first American officer to cross that bridge, back when it still stood defiant against German retreat. Now it was gone, and the weight of it settled on his shoulders like a curse. He turned to the river, murmuring to himself, "We got across once. We'll do it again." Behind him, the engineers prepared their tools: steel pontoons, cables, and Bailey Bridge sections. Trucks idled, their headlights blacked out under the wartime blackout discipline. Somewhere upriver, the low hum of artillery began again. The Rhine shimmered under the moonlight, cold, powerful, endless. On one side stood the Allies, bruised but unbroken. On the other, Germany waited, its defenses crumbling but not yet dead. And between them, the river flowed like a line of destiny. The collapse at Remagen was more than the fall of a bridge. It was a challenge hurled by fate itself. The war had given the engineers a task no army manual had ever prepared them for: to build a new path across the Rhine, under fire, in less than half a day. As midnight drew near, the order went out. Tools were checked, cables coiled, lanterns dimmed. Somewhere in the darkness, a voice broke the silence. 10 hours, a soldier muttered. "That's all they're giving us." Major Anderson rose, pulling his coat tight against the wind. "Then 10 hours it is." The men stared at the roaring river ahead, the shattered bridge behind, and the black horizon where the war's end still burned. Tomorrow, the race against death would begin. The night after the Ludendorff Bridge fell, the banks of the Rhine became a world of smoke and steel. Floodlights swept through drifting fog, catching the glint of helmets and the silhouettes of men moving with quiet urgency. The air smelled of oil, wet earth, and burnt metal. Somewhere across the river, German artillery cracked the darkness, shells bursting in flashes that momentarily turned the river silver. In a makeshift command tent outside Remagen, maps were spread across folding tables, weighed down by coffee mugs and ammunition boxes. General William Hogue leaned over the chart, his finger tracing the bend of the river. His voice was low but sharp, the voice of a man who had been awake for too long. "Remagen was our miracle," he said. "We crossed the Rhine when nobody thought we could." Now that miracle's at the bottom of the river, Colonel Heilmann nodded grimly. "The 9th Division's advance units are stranded. We've got 15,000 men east of the Rhine with limited supply lines. If we don't re-establish a crossing, they'll be isolated." Hogue straightened, his jaw tight. "Then we build another bridge." There was a pause, long and heavy. The officers exchanged glances. Everyone knew what that meant. The river was wide, the current fierce, and the east bank still under enemy fire. To attempt a pontoon bridge, there was madness. But to do nothing was worse. "Get me the 51st and 291st Engineer Combat Battalions," Hogue ordered. "If anyone can do it, it's those men." Outside, the wind rattled the tent flaps. Orders rippled through the camp like a current of their own, passing from officer to runner, from runner to truck driver, and finally to the soldiers themselves. By dawn, the first convoys began to roll toward the water's edge. Trucks loaded with bridge pontoons, aluminum decking, and reels of cable crept along the cratered road, their engines growling in the mist. Each man aboard knew the weight of what was being asked. At the head of one column rode Major James B. Anderson of the 291st, a square-shouldered man with deep lines etched across his face from months of war. He'd built temporary bridges across France and Belgium, patched roadways under sniper fire, and laid pontoon spans under the thunder of German artillery. But the Rhine, this was something else entirely. As his jeep bounced over the muddy ruts toward the riverbank, Anderson glanced toward his driver. "How's it looking up ahead?" "Still catching flak, sir," the driver replied. "Jerry's dug in on the far side. They've got those 80s zeroed in on the river." Anderson grunted. "We'll keep low. Once we're in place, we build fast and we build quiet." They arrived at a stretch of river about half a mile downstream from the wreckage of the Ludendorff Bridge. The remains of the old structure loomed like a black skeleton against the pale morning. Twisted beams jutting out from the water. Smoke still curled from the east bank. The engineers climbed out of their trucks, boots sinking into the cold mud, and stared at the task before them. Captain George Whiting of the 51st Battalion walked up beside Anderson, pulling his gloves tighter. "Hell of a sight," he muttered. "Looks like the Rhine's daring us to try." Anderson nodded, eyes fixed on the water. "Then we'll take the dare." Behind them, a dozen trucks rolled to a stop. Soldiers began unloading the heavy pontoons, steel and rubber boats that would form the floating foundation of the new bridge. Each one was hauled down toward the riverbank, guided by men with ropes and curses, the sound of their labor mingling with the low thunder of distant guns. In the command post nearby, Lieutenant Colonel Heilmann coordinated with field telephones, his headset crackling. "We need to synchronize artillery suppression before they start laying pontoons," he said into the line. "I want counter-battery fire ready the moment the Krauts open up." From across the river, a sharp whistle split the air. Then a blast. A shell landed in the water 100 yards from the shoreline, sending a plume of spray skyward. Another followed, closer this time. The Germans had spotted the movement. "Get down!" someone shouted. Men hit the ground as the third round exploded near the trucks, showering the road with mud and shrapnel. A tire burst, and one of the pontoon boats tumbled into the ditch. Anderson rolled over, shouting to his sergeants, "Keep the gear moving. Don't bunch up. Spread the trucks. Get the bridge parts under cover." The engineers scrambled, dragging equipment behind the embankment. The shelling went on for 10 minutes before it stopped as abruptly as it had begun. In the sudden silence, the river's roar filled the world again. Private Joseph Delaney, still shaken from the collapse of the Ludendorff, crouched beside the pontoon crates. "Sir," he asked quietly, "they really think we can build a whole damn bridge under that kind of fire?" Anderson looked at him, his expression calm but unyielding. "No," he said. "They know we can." The order came down from Hogue at noon. Begin construction immediately. The bridge had to be operational within 10 hours, no exceptions. Supplies, reinforcements, and medical units were piling up on the west bank, waiting for a way across. Every minute counted. Anderson gathered his officers in a half circle around a mud-streaked map spread over a jeep hood. "We'll build in sections," he said, tapping with his pencil. "First, the 291st will get the upstream anchors down. The 51st will start assembling pontoons and catwalks. Once we've got the first span secure, armor can move in to test the load. We'll rotate crews every 2 hours. Anyone who drops from exhaustion gets dragged off and replaced." Captain Whiting nodded. "We'll need smoke cover. If they can see us, we're dead." "Already arranged," Anderson said. "The artillery boys are setting up white phosphorus rounds upstream. It'll give us a curtain, but it won't last long." 10 hours, Whiting murmured, shaking his head. "Under fire." Anderson met his gaze. "Then we build like our lives depend on it. Because they do." The meeting broke, and the engineers moved to their positions. Hammers clanged against metal. Men shouted for rope, for bolts, for anchors. Engines coughed to life, powering winches that dragged the pontoons into the water. The current grabbed at them immediately, twisting and pulling. Sergeant Knox waded waist-deep into the Rhine, his teeth chattering as he guided one of the steel pontoons into place. "Feels like the damn river's alive," he yelled. "It is," Delaney called back from the shore, "and it doesn't like us much." Overhead, the sky was a shifting blur of smoke and cloud. Occasionally, a streak of tracer fire crossed the air as German machine guns tested their range. Each time the engineers froze, then went back to work as though nothing had happened. By mid-afternoon, the first sections began to take shape. The sound of the river blended with the steady rhythm of tools, a strange, desperate symphony. The men moved with mechanical precision, their faces streaked with mud and sweat. From his post on the hill, General Hogue watched through binoculars. The bridge was beginning to grow, a fragile thread stretching out over the Rhine. Behind him, a radio operator relayed reports from the east bank. "Our boys are holding," he said. "They're waiting on the bridge, sir." Hogue lowered the glasses, his voice a whisper. "Then they won't wait long." The sun began to sink behind the hills, turning the river gold. The engineers kept building, their shadows long against the water. Every hammer strike was a promise. Every beam laid a step closer to salvation. The Rhine had taken their bridge, but not their will. Orders from the top had turned desperation into determination, and the men of the 51st and 291st were answering in steel and sweat. Night was coming, and with it the heaviest fire yet. but they would not stop. The bridge would rise from the river again. The night was black as wet iron. When the engineers moved out, rain came down in fine, cold sheets, blurring the flicker of distant fires. Ahead lay the Rhine, a dark, endless muscle of water thrashing beneath the weight of war. Every man in the column knew that by dawn, he might be part of it. "Keep it quiet," Sergeant Knox whispered, voice barely cutting through the hiss of the storm. Engines off past the embankment. We push from here. The trucks had halted just shy of the river. Now the men shouldered the pontoons, hulking metal shells slick with rain, and began the slow, grunting march through mud that sucked at their boots. The ground trembled with distant detonations. Every few seconds, flashes lit the horizon like silent lightning before the thunder rolled in behind them. Private Delaney stumbled, nearly dropping his end of the pontoon. "Feels like the river's trying to pull us in already," he muttered. Knox grinned through his dripping helmet. "She's just saying hello." At the water's edge, Major Anderson stood with a flashlight covered by red cloth, studying the current. The Rhine's surface was a torrent of black waves, whipped white by the wind. Somewhere across the way, invisible in the darkness, lay the enemy. German guns dug deep into the eastern hills. Their artillery had been quiet for an hour now, and everyone knew what that meant. "They're waiting for us to start," Captain Whiting said beside him. Anderson didn't look up. "Then let's not disappoint them." A whistle blew once, sharp and low. The first pontoon slid into the water, slapping against the current. Men waded in waist deep, guiding it into position while ropes uncoiled behind them. The cold hit like a blade. Even through thick uniforms, it bit straight into bone. "Anchor line," someone shouted. "Hold it steady." Chains rattled. Pontoons bucked and jerked as the river tried to tear them away. Anderson moved among his men, shouting orders over the wind. "Keep that spacing tight." 2 meters. Don't let her drift. A second pontoon went in, then a third. The bridge was beginning to take shape, a fragile spine stretching toward the far bank. And then came the sound they'd been dreading, the distant cough of German artillery. "Down! Everyone down!" The first shell landed 50 yards upriver, throwing a fountain of water into the air. The second found the shore, blasting a crater where a stack of planking had been. Mud rained down in clumps the size of fists. Men hit the ground, helmets ringing, hearts pounding. Anderson stayed on his knees, eyes fixed on the river. "Get those pontoons locked. They'll walk the fire down on us any second." Another barrage screamed in. One shell exploded mid-air, showering the site with hot fragments. Shouts rose from the shallows. One man hit, another dragged backward through the water. Whiting crawled to Anderson's side. "We can't keep this up in the open. They've got us bracketed." "We stop now. We lose everything we've laid," Anderson snapped. "Keep them moving." He grabbed a fallen radio from the mud, turned the dial, and shouted into it. "Smoke! I want phosphorus on the far tree line, now." Minutes later, the western sky pulsed with streaks of white fire. The rounds burst above the river, trailing thick, ghostly smoke that rolled across the water. Within moments, the whole scene was swallowed in a pale, choking fog. "Move! Move! Move!" Knox yelled, waving his arm through the haze. "We've got cover!" The men rose again, soaked and shaking, and went back to work. They moved like phantoms now, figures in the mist, their silhouettes caught in the red glare of burning debris. Chains clanked, hammers rang, the bridge inched forward plank by plank. Delaney and his partner hauled another section toward the edge. The current slammed into it with the force of a fist, spinning it sideways. "Grab the line," Delaney shouted. "I got it," his partner yelled back, wrapping the rope around his arm. For a second, the pontoon steadied, and then a shell struck the water just yards away. The blast threw them both backward. Delaney hit the mud hard, his ears ringing. When he looked up, his partner was gone. Only the rope remained, frayed and hissing as it drifted downstream. Anderson was there in seconds. "Where is he?" Delaney pointed weakly toward the river. "The blast. Keep your head down, Private. We'll find him." After Anderson's hand clapped the young man's shoulder, firm and brief. "Right now, the bridge needs you." Delaney nodded, throat tight, and forced himself back to his feet. The hours bled together. By midnight, the engineers had pushed the span halfway across. The smoke screen had thinned. Flashes from the far bank lit the mist in hellish bursts. Artillery still crashed intermittently, but the rhythm of work never stopped. Somewhere behind them, the distant rumble of tanks echoed through the valley. Pattons and Shermans moving up to cross when the bridge was ready. Their crews depended on what these soaked, sleepless men were doing here in the dark. Captain Whiting checked his watch, the faint glow barely visible under his coat. 4 hours left, he muttered. Anderson nodded, eyes hollow but steady. "Then we make them count." He stepped onto the nearest section, testing its sway. The pontoons rocked beneath his weight, sloshing water over the decking. "Tighten the west anchor another notch," he called out. "She's drifting." A team obeyed, working the winch with mechanical precision. Every man had long stopped feeling his hands. From across the river came the harsh chatter of an MG-42. Tracers cut through the fog like red comets, snapping into the bridge supports. "Machine guns, sector east," Knox barked. "Get those sandbags up." Men dove behind tool crates and coils of rope, firing bursts back into the mist. The sound of rifles cracked and echoed across the water. One bullet clipped a lantern, plunging the near shore into deeper darkness. Anderson gritted his teeth. "Kill the lights!" All of them. "We finish by touch from here." So they did, hammering in near blackness, guided by feel and faith. The only illumination came from flares burning high above, their white light sliding across faces smeared with river mud. Delaney worked beside Knox now, both of them hauling a new panel into place. "Can't see a damn thing," Delaney panted. "You don't need to see," Knox said. "You just need to finish." By 0300 hours, the easternmost pontoons finally brushed the far bank. Whiting waded forward, waist deep in the current, shouting to the men ahead. "Bridge contact! Secure the line!" Cheers rose weakly through the rain. Some laughed. Others just sagged where they stood, too spent to speak. Anderson climbed up onto the bridge, water dripping from his coat, and looked across the span. The Rhine, that roaring, murderous barrier, now had a thread stretched across it again. A trembling, living thread, built by men who refused to die before the job was done. Whiting limped over beside him. "We made it," he said quietly. Anderson gave a tired smile. "We did. But it's not ours until the first man crosses." He turned, raising his voice so the men could hear. "Get ready to test her. Light loads first, vehicles after dawn. And someone find me that coffee we keep promising each other." Laughter broke through the exhaustion, faint but real. As the rain eased and the smoke began to drift apart, the engineers stood along their creation, watching the dark river slide beneath their boots. Behind them, the sky was just beginning to pale with the first suggestion of dawn. Ahead, Germany waited. And between them lay the bridge they'd built in the fire line. One plank, one heartbeat, one man at a time. The hours that followed were a blur of smoke, sweat, and steel. a symphony of survival hammered out in the dark. The engineers had already been awake for nearly 36 hours, their bodies running on black coffee, adrenaline, and something deeper. The unspoken understanding that if they failed, 15,000 soldiers would be stranded west of the Rhine. The river hissed and boiled beneath them. Each pontoon that locked into place became a victory measured in seconds. Each delay could mean another man dead. Major Anderson stood near the waterline, rain dripping from his helmet. His voice cut through the noise like a whip. "Keep that spacing even. She won't hold if she flexes in the middle. Tighten those lashings. Make them sing." Corporal Vance, his sleeves rolled up to the elbows, yanked at a line that bit into his raw palms. "She's drifting left, sir." Anderson glanced at the taut cable trembling under strain. "Then pull her back right. Use the current. Don't fight it. Work with it." The pontoon creaked as the river slammed into it. Men strained their shoulders and backs, muscles burning as they hauled the metal monster into alignment. A shell burst across the far bank, throwing sparks into the rain. Then another, closer this time, sending shock waves through the muddy shore. The Germans had spotted movement again. Captain Whiting ducked instinctively, shouting into his radio, "Smoke!" More smoke on grid Baker 7. "Keep that curtain thick." White phosphorus rounds screamed overhead and burst into ghostly clouds. Within minutes, the Rhine disappeared behind a wall of shifting gray, the world reduced to sound and touch. "Go, go," Anderson ordered. "We don't stop until she's done." The engineers surged forward again, their boots sloshing through mud and water. The air smelled of oil, sweat, and phosphorus. Wooden planks thudded into place, bolts clanged, and hammers sang in frantic rhythm. Private Delaney's hands were shaking as he tightened a clamp. His partner, Corporal Russo, gave him a sidelong glance. "You're rattling worse than the bridge." "Can't help it," Delaney said. "Every time one of those guns fires, I swear my heart stops." Russo smirked, wiping grime from his face. "Then keep moving before it starts asking questions." Their laughter was short-lived. A shell landed 50 yards upstream, sending a geyser of water crashing over them. The shockwave knocked both men to their knees. Shrapnel hissed into the mud like red-hot nails. Anderson was there a moment later, shouting over the ringing in their ears. "You two still alive?" "Yes, sir," Russo gasped, coughing up mud. "Then get that section secured." "I don't want this bridge dying before I do." The men scrambled back to their task. Around them, chaos continued. Men shouting, cranes groaning, the wind howling off the river like a living thing. Hours passed in fragments. A command barked, a tool passed hand to hand, the scream of distant artillery. Nobody looked at the time anymore. The clock didn't matter. The bridge was the clock now, ticking closer to dawn. At 0300, the midpoint of the build, the structure extended like a silver serpent halfway across the Rhine. The far end floated free, lashed by the current. Every pontoon was a gamble, a fragile lifeboat holding steady against the fury of the river and the enemy alike. Captain Whiting crouched beside Anderson on the near bank. "We've got 8 pontoons left, maybe 10 hours if the current keeps up. And if those krauts don't hit us again," Anderson's jaw tightened. "They will. But they won't hit us fast enough." He straightened, scanning the mist. The faint glow of burning wrecks flickered on the far shore, and somewhere in that light he could just make out the dark figures of enemy troops retreating deeper into Germany. The Allies were so close, he could almost feel it. But the river still stood between them like a dare. 10 hours, he murmured. Then this war changes direction. A voice crackled through the field radio. Major, this is Division HQ. Update on bridge status. Over. Anderson grabbed the receiver. Halfway across, holding steady. Under continuous artillery harassment, minimal casualties. Estimate completion by dawn. Copy that, Major. You've got armor waiting in the wings. Don't let that bridge go down. The Rhine's our last wall before Berlin. He handed the receiver back to Whiting, who smirked. No pressure? Anderson didn't smile. Pressure's what keeps the steel from snapping. Behind them, Sergeant Knox was directing another wave of men toward the water. Keep those pontoons coming. We're not decorating the river for Christmas. The next section was ready, the largest yet. A team of 12 engineers waded chest deep into the freezing current, guiding the hulking piece of metal into place. The ropes cut their hands raw, but no one let go. Then the inevitable came. The German artillery found its mark. The first shell struck the water directly beneath the half-assembled section, sending a wall of black water roaring over the men. 2 were knocked clean off their feet and vanished downstream. Another pontoon cracked along its seam, belching steam and river foam. Man overboard, Knox shouted. Get ropes in the water. Anderson sprinted forward, slipping on the slick decking. Hold those pontoons steady. Don't let her drift. Whiting's voice bellowed from the bank. Incoming again. 3 more shells screamed through the smoke, slamming into the near shore. One hit a stack of timber, setting it ablaze. The flames danced red against the fog, a hellish glow over the water. Delaney found himself beside the fire, hauling on a rope that burned against his palms. The pontoon groaned, threatening to tear loose entirely. Russo grabbed the other end, teeth bared. Pull, damn you! He roared. They pulled until it locked into place, and suddenly the bridge held again. A patchwork miracle, held together by muscle, wire, and willpower. By dawn, the smoke began to clear. The sun rose blood-red over the eastern hills, reflecting off the wet metal of the bridge. The engineers stood like ghosts, their faces streaked with grime, eyes hollow but burning with defiance. Anderson limped along the decking, inspecting the line. She's holding, he said softly. By God, she's holding. Whiting appeared beside him, leaning heavily on his rifle. 10 hours, he said. You promised. Anderson looked at the river, still angry, still endless, but now conquered by the thin ribbon of steel and wood that spanned its width. 10 hours, he repeated, and not a minute longer. He turned to his men, voice raw but steady. Get ready to test her. First trucks cross in 15 minutes. A murmur went through the ranks, disbelief, pride, exhaustion all tangled together. The men moved slowly, almost reverently, checking each lash, each cable. When the first truck engine roared to life, every head turned toward it. The vehicle rolled forward, tires slapping against wet planks. The bridge groaned, but held. Anderson watched in silence, his gloved hands gripping the railing. Behind him, the rest of the army waited. 15,000 men, tanks, trucks, artillery, all depending on this fragile artery they'd built in the dark. The truck reached the far side, its engine still rumbling. A cheer broke from the engineers, echoing over the river. For the first time in hours, Anderson allowed himself to breathe. All right, he said quietly. Now let's see how many lives this thing can carry. The bridge was no longer a plan or a blueprint. It was a heartbeat stretched across the Rhine. Every bolt, every rope, every scarred plank told the story of the men who built it. And as the convoy began to roll forward, one after another, the engineers stood silently by. Their work finished, but their war far from over. The bridge trembled, alive under the weight of destiny. Dawn rose like a bruise over the Rhine. The fog that had cloaked the river all night began to thin, curling away to reveal the jagged skeletons of shattered trees and smoking ruins. The engineers stood motionless along their creation. The pontoon bridge that had taken 10 sleepless hours and a small eternity of courage to complete. It trembled underfoot, creaking and groaning as the river pressed against its sides. Major Anderson ran his glove along one of the wet railings, the cold biting into his fingers. He could feel the vibration through the metal, the pulse of water beneath, the subtle flex of every joint. The bridge was alive, a living thing born from exhaustion and defiance. Captain Whiting appeared beside him, his face streaked with grease and soot. "She's ready," he said quietly. "If she can take a jeep, she can take a tank." Anderson nodded, his gaze fixed on the far shore. The eastern bank was a jagged smear of mud and smoke, but beyond it lay open country, Germany itself. "Then let's start writing the end of this war," he said. Whiting raised a hand. "Signal the first vehicle." A low rumble answered. From the tree line behind them, the first M4 Sherman tank rolled into view, its turret turning lazily as if sniffing the wind. Its treads churned through the mud, leaving deep gouges in the earth. The men who had built the bridge stepped back instinctively, their faces pale with a mix of awe and fear. They had built this thing from rope and hope. Now they were about to test it against 30 tons of armored steel. Sergeant Knox stood near the ramp, waving the driver forward. "Nice and easy," he shouted. "She's got the backbone for it. Just don't stomp her to death." The tank crept forward, its engine growling, tracks clattering on the wooden decking. The bridge dipped slightly, pontoons hissing as they shifted under the weight. The river gurgled and slapped against the sides, eager to swallow anything that fell. Everyone held their breath. Halfway across, a gust of wind caught the smoke and peeled it away. The tank was now fully visible against the red dawn, a black silhouette moving across the fragile spine of the bridge. Then came the first shell. It landed far upriver, sending a fountain of water skyward. Another followed, closer this time, shaking the planks. "Artillery's back," someone yelled. Anderson turned to Whiting. "Get that convoy moving." "The longer we wait, the easier we are to find." Whiting shouted into his radio, "Convoy 1, move!" Tanks and trucks, no spacing delays. Engines roared to life in response. The second Sherman rolled onto the bridge, followed by 2 jeeps loaded with infantry. Behind them, the rest of the column began to form, a line of steel and determination stretching down the muddy road. Knox barked orders, his voice hoarse but steady. "Keep 'em rolling. If she creaks, she's talking. If she cracks, then you run." The bridge was groaning now, every bolt and cable singing in protest as the first tank reached the far side. When its treads finally climbed onto solid ground, a cheer erupted from the engineers. "She held," Russo shouted, slapping Delaney on the back. "She damn well held." Delaney grinned through the grime. "Guess we're bridge builders after all." Their laughter was cut short by another explosion. This one was closer, showering the near bank with dirt and metal. One of the trucks jolted sideways, its driver swerving to stay on course. Anderson ducked as fragments pinged off the bridge railing. "They've zeroed us in. Get those smoke mortars firing again." White smoke began to bloom across the river, rolling low over the water. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to turn the engineers into shadows again. Whiting crouched beside Anderson, shouting over the thunder of engines. "They'll try to take the bridge out, sir. We're sitting ducks." "Then we move faster," Anderson said flatly. "Every vehicle that crosses is one less the river can claim." A second Sherman was halfway across now, its treads pounding in rhythm with the current. Behind it came a convoy of supply trucks, their canvas tops flapping in the wind. Drivers hunched low over their wheels, eyes locked forward, knowing a single mistake could send them sliding into the Rhine's black water. Private Delaney jogged alongside one of the trucks, checking the tension on a cable. His boots slipped on the wet decking, and for a terrifying second, he was half over the side, staring into the churning current below. Knox's hand shot out, grabbing his jacket and yanking him upright. "Don't feed the river, kid," Knox grunted. "She's got enough to eat." Delaney nodded breathlessly, wiping rain from his face. "Yes, sir." The bridge swayed again as a column of armored cars rumbled onto it. The engineers could hear every joint creak, every pontoon slap the water below. Then, a sound like ripping cloth, followed by a metallic crack. "Cable 3, someone shouted. "She's coming loose." Whiting sprinted toward the sound, two men behind him. The cable on the western side had snapped free, whipping through the air like a steel snake. The bridge was drifting, just slightly, but enough to threaten the alignment. "Get a line on it," Whiting yelled. Two engineers plunged into the shallows, icy water up to their waists, hauling the cable back toward its mooring. Every muscle in their bodies screamed as they fought the current. Anderson grabbed the winch and turned it himself, teeth gritted. "Hold her steady!" Just a few more feet. The cable slid into place. Russo slammed the bolt shut, hammering it home with the butt of his wrench. The bridge shuddered once, then steadied. "She's holding," Russo gasped. Anderson leaned against the railing, chest heaving. "She'll hold till Berlin if we keep her fed with blood and bolts." By mid-morning, the sun had broken fully through the clouds. The smoke was thinning now, revealing the line of tanks crawling up the far shore like metal insects. Behind them came supply convoys, fuel, ammunition, medics, even a few captured German vehicles pressed into Allied service. For the first time in days, the air over the Rhine was alive with the sound of triumph. A few feet away, Delaney crouched near the water's edge, watching as another truck rolled past. He turned to Knox. "Sir, think the Krauts know we're coming?" Knox grinned, the expression weary but fierce. "They'll hear us soon enough." From the far bank, a tank commander stood in his turret and saluted back toward the engineers. Anderson saw it and returned the gesture silently. The bridge, battered, blackened, miraculous, had done what no one believed possible. It had carried the first wave of the Allied army into the heart of Germany. As the last tank of the first convoy crossed, Anderson walked the length of the bridge one more time. The planks trembled beneath his boots, but they held. Around him, the river rushed on, indifferent, eternal. He stopped in the middle, watching the rippling reflection of the tanks moving across the surface. Each one was a promise, a piece of the ending that had taken 6 brutal years to reach. Whiting joined him, leaning on the railing. "You realize this bridge just saved 15,000 lives?" Anderson nodded. "And it'll save 15,000 more before we're done." He turned, taking one last look at the men still working, tightening bolts, replacing boards, readying for the next wave. "Keep her strong," he said quietly. "This bridge is our heartbeat now." The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of smoke and oil. The sound of engines faded into the distance, replaced by the rhythmic slap of water against steel. The bridge stood defiant in the morning light, a scar across the Rhine, and a symbol of everything that refused to break. The bridge groaned like a living creature beneath the weight of war. All day, the flow of armor and men had poured eastward. Jeeps, half-tracks, trucks stacked with ammunition and fuel, each one thundering over the pontoons that bobbed restlessly against the Rhine's current. It should have been a victory. But for Major Anderson and his engineers, it was just another beginning. The real battle was to keep the bridge alive. By afternoon, the air had turned heavy with tension. The Germans had regrouped across the far bank, pulling artillery into the tree line. Distant flashes now flickered with mechanical precision, followed by the whistle and crash of shells landing ever closer to the span. "Adjust the tension lines," Anderson barked, voice hoarse from shouting. "If the cables slacken, we lose the middle section." Corporal Russo and two others heaved at the winch, their boots slipping on the soaked decking. Every muscle in their backs screamed as they tightened the steel cables anchoring the bridge to the shore. "Sir!" Captain Whiting called from the northern abutment. "Section 4 is taking on water. The starboard pontoons cracked." Anderson sprinted down the length of the bridge, boots thudding on planks slick with oil and rain. He could feel the tremor of tank treads behind him as another Sherman crawled past. The bridge swayed beneath the weight, creaking like old timber under strain. When he reached Section 4, a geyser of icy water was spraying through a hole the size of a helmet. Two engineers knelt beside it, trying to jam a tarred plank into the breach. "Pump it out," Anderson shouted. "Get the sealant ready. Move." Private Delaney, soaked to the bone, turned the hand pump until his arms went numb. The river gushed in faster than it went out. The pontoon groaned, dipping lower by the minute. "Sir," he gasped, "if it floods, it'll drag the whole section down." Anderson crouched beside him, his voice calm but firm. "Then don't let it flood." He took the plank himself, slammed it into place, and hammered it down with the butt of his wrench. Water hissed and spat through the cracks, but the flow slowed. Russo appeared moments later with a bucket of bitumen, slapping it over the seal until it held. The bridge steadied. For now. Then the sky screamed. A pair of German dive bombers, Stukas, broke through the clouds, their sirens wailing that awful, metallic shriek that made men's hearts stop. Anderson looked up in horror as they tipped into their dive, sunlight flashing off their wings. "Take cover!" Whiting roared. "Get down!" The first bomb struck the far bank, sending a column of dirt and flame 100 feet into the air. The second landed short, hammering the river itself. The explosion threw a wall of water over the bridge, knocking men flat. Anderson coughed, choking on river spray, his ears ringing. Around him, engineers scrambled to their feet, grabbing tools, ropes, anything still intact. "They'll be back," Whiting shouted, spitting out mud. "You know they will." "They always come back," Anderson muttered. "But so do we." Within minutes, the air was filled with the low growl of engines, American anti-aircraft units setting up along the near shore. They opened fire as the Stukas circled around for another pass. Tracers streaked upward, stitching the sky with lines of light. One of the bombers erupted into flame, tumbling into the trees across the river. The other peeled away, smoke trailing from its wing. A ragged cheer went up from the men, but Anderson didn't join it. He was already scanning the bridge, counting damage, counting faces. "Where's Knox?" he demanded. Delaney pointed toward the midpoint. "Still patching the anchor chains." Anderson ran. Halfway across the span, he found Knox crouched by the western cable housing, working with his wrench. Blood dripped from his sleeve, but he ignored it. "You're hit," Anderson said. Knox didn't look up. "Just a scratch." "The real problem's here. She's loosening under the strain." Current stronger than it was this morning, Anderson knelt beside him, gripping the railing. The bridge vibrated under their feet, every gust of wind making it groan. "Reinforce it with a secondary line. Use the auxiliary spool from Section 1, Knox nodded. "On it." He staggered to his feet and signaled two men over. Together they dragged the heavy spool of cable to the edge, the metal glinting dull silver in the pale afternoon light. It took 6 of them to throw the line over the side and anchor it to the shore. The bridge held fast again, but only barely. As night fell, the temperature dropped. A cold wind swept down the river, cutting through soaked uniforms and trembling hands. The engineers worked under flickering lamps now, their faces pale and hollow with exhaustion. "Sir," Whiting said quietly, approaching Anderson. "The men need rest. Half of them haven't slept since the bridge went up." Anderson looked out across the Rhine. The headlights of endless convoys still snaked across his bridge, each one grinding its way east. "We rest when they're done crossing," he said. "Major, they won't stop tonight." You know that Anderson's voice softened, just slightly. "Then neither can we." A distant boom echoed from the far bank, artillery again. The Germans were probing, testing the Allies' hold on the river. Each shell sent ripples through the bridge, like the Rhine itself was flinching. Delaney ducked as another explosion lit the night sky. "Feels like they're firing just for us," he said bitterly. Russo handed him a wrench. "Then let's make sure they hit nothing but water." They went back to work, hammering, tightening, patching. Every sound was amplified in the dark. The hiss of the river, the thud of boots, the metallic ring of tools. At midnight, the alarm went up again. "Saboteurs!" someone shouted. A patrol had spotted movement along the near shore. German swimmers trying to plant charges beneath the pontoons. Searchlights snapped on, cutting through the fog like knives. Machine guns opened fire, their tracers sparking across the water. One of the saboteurs made it within 20 yards before a bullet found him. His body drifted past, rolling in the current, until it vanished under the bridge. The men said nothing. They just tightened their grips on their rifles and kept working. By 0300 hours, the final convoy of the night crossed the span. The bridge was battered, scarred, and slick with oil. But it still held. Anderson walked its length in silence. Each step echoed hollowly in the wind. He paused halfway, staring down at the black water rushing beneath. The Rhine looked endless in the moonlight, an unbroken ribbon of silver and shadow. Whiting joined him, holding a cigarette between trembling fingers. "Never thought I'd see the day a bunch of engineers held a front line." Anderson gave a tired smile. "We didn't hold it. We built it." Whiting chuckled softly, then looked out toward the eastern bank where the rumble of tanks still rolled faintly through the darkness. "Berlin's waiting," he said. Anderson nodded. "And this bridge is the road that'll get them there." He turned back toward his men, mud-caked, bone-weary, but still moving, and felt a surge of quiet pride. They weren't soldiers in the traditional sense. They didn't win ground with rifles or artillery. But they'd done something just as vital. They'd kept the lifeline beating. And as the first light of dawn broke over the Rhine once again, painting the battered bridge in hues of gold and gray, Anderson whispered to himself, almost like a prayer, "Hold fast, girl." Just one more day, dawn rose over the Rhine like a revelation. The mists that had haunted the river for days finally began to lift, curling away to reveal the battered pontoon bridge stretched across the water like a scar of steel and timber. It creaked and groaned with each gust of wind, its metal ribs darkened by soot and oil, its planks slick with mud and blood. Yet it stood, defiant, alive. The impossible bridge. Major Anderson leaned against a support beam on the western bank, his helmet tucked under one arm. His face was gray with exhaustion, his eyes red-rimmed from 2 nights without sleep. But there was something fierce in his expression, a quiet pride born from pain. Around him, engineers from the 51st and 291st Combat Battalions slumped wherever they could find space. On crates, in the mud, against sandbags, tools still clutched loosely in their hands. They had done it. The first morning convoy had already begun to roll across. Jeeps, trucks, and tanks lined the approach road for nearly a mile, their engines rumbling in rhythm like an approaching storm. The air smelled of gasoline, cordite, and wet earth. Captain Whiting approached, rubbing at his unshaven chin. "She's holding steady, Major. The anchor lines are tight, sections are level, and the last of the pontoon repairs are sealed." He gave a weary grin. She might just make it through the day. Anderson looked out toward the middle of the bridge, where men in helmets and greatcoats trudged eastward in steady columns. "She'll make it through more than that," he said. "She's earned her place in history." Whiting chuckled softly. "You think they'll remember us? The engineers who built her?" Anderson's gaze stayed fixed on the horizon. "They'll remember the bridge." That's enough. From across the river came the faint thunder of artillery, though it sounded distant now, scattered. The Germans were pulling back, their defense of the Rhine shattered. Beyond that lay the heart of the Reich. Cologne, Essen, Frankfurt. The road into Germany was open. A group of infantrymen passed by, their uniforms caked in grime, faces smeared with soot. One of them, a young sergeant barely older than 20, paused to salute Anderson. "Sir, hell of a bridge you built," he said. Anderson nodded, offering a tired half-smile. "Don't thank me, son. Just make sure it's worth crossing." The sergeant grinned and jogged off to join his unit. As the morning wore on, the sound of movement grew constant, boots, treads, and the clatter of wheels against the floating deck. The river surged below, tugging at the pontoons. But the bridge held fast, anchored by cables as thick as a man's arm. Every time a tank rolled over, the whole structure shuddered. Yet it did not break. Private Delaney, his hands still raw and blistered from the pumps, stood with Russo near the midpoint, watching the endless stream of men and machines. 10 hours to build? Delaney murmured, shaking his head. "And now it's carrying half the damn army." Russo smirked, lighting a cigarette with trembling fingers. "Yeah. Guess we didn't waste our time, huh?" He offered the match to Delaney, who waved it away. "After this, I might quit for good." Russo laughed, though there was little humor in it. "After this, we might all quit for good." The laughter faded into silence as a formation of C-47s roared overhead, their shadows sweeping across the river. The Allies were in motion everywhere now, bridging, bombing, advancing. The final act of the European war had begun, and it had started here on a floating strip of wood and steel. By noon, word came down from command that 15,000 men had crossed, and still the stream continued. Anderson could hardly process the number. 15,000 lives, moved safely because the bridge had not given way, because his men had refused to stop. Whiting joined him again at the shore, holding a clipboard filled with notes. "Headquarters wants the bridge named, sir. They're calling it the Victory Bridge for now, until the brass decides otherwise." Anderson gave a short, tired laugh. "Victory Bridge, huh? Sounds too clean for what it cost." Whiting nodded slowly. "Yeah, maybe call it the 10-hour miracle." Anderson's eyes softened. Miracle? Number. Just men doing their job. A gust of wind whipped across the water, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke from burning German positions on the far bank. Somewhere in the distance, artillery boomed again. Not at them this time, but far ahead, toward the retreating enemy. Then came the sound Anderson had been waiting for. The low, rhythmic thunder of tank treads. 2 Sherman tanks rolled onto the bridge, their olive-drab hulls gleaming with morning dew. The engineers stepped aside, watching in silence as the machines rumbled forward, their tracks grinding against the wooden planks. The bridge swayed, but held. The tanks reached the far bank without incident, their silhouettes disappearing into the haze. A collective sigh rose from the men. Whiting turned to Anderson, his voice quiet. "That's it." The first armor's over, Anderson nodded slowly. "Then we've done our part." He sank onto a crate, rubbing the grime from his hands. The adrenaline that had kept him going for days was finally wearing off, leaving only exhaustion and relief. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to breathe. Across the bridge, engineers moved like ghosts, checking lines, tightening bolts, patching seams. None spoke much. They didn't need to. They all understood what this meant. They had taken the Rhine, Hitler's great natural fortress, the barrier the Führer once swore would never be crossed by enemy hands. Now, Allied soldiers marched over it by the thousands, their boots drumming a victory song on planks laid down by men who were never meant to fight. That night, the fires on the far shore burned low. The sky turned indigo, stars glittering faintly above the black silhouette of the bridge. The engineers huddled near their equipment, eating cold rations, talking in low voices. Delaney looked up at the starlit span and said softly, "She's beautiful, ain't she? All that noise, all that death. And she's still standing." Russo grinned faintly. "Yeah, she's tougher than any of us." Anderson overheard them and smiled to himself. He didn't correct them. The bridge was alive in a way, forged from their sweat, their fear, their stubborn refusal to give in. It was a symbol now, not just of engineering, but of endurance. In the early hours before dawn, he walked out alone to the center of the span. The Rhine moved darkly beneath him, whispering through the gaps between pontoons. He leaned on the railing and stared east. Somewhere out there, beyond the forests and fields, beyond the fading rumble of artillery, lay the end of the war. He thought of the men who hadn't made it, those crushed under falling beams, drowned in the current, or cut down by shell fire as they worked. The bridge was built from more than steel and timber. It was built from sacrifice. 15,000 across, he whispered, his voice almost lost in the wind. 15,000 home, because of you. Behind him, the first rays of morning light spilled over the horizon, catching on the surface of the river. The bridge glowed gold for a moment, as if touched by something divine. Whiting appeared behind him, his breath misting in the chill air. "Orders came through," he said quietly. "We're moving out tonight." Another crossing upstream. Anderson nodded without turning. "There'll be another bridge then?" "Yeah," Whiting said, "but none like this one." They stood in silence, watching the sun climb higher. The Rhine no longer looked like a barrier. It looked like a path, a gleaming road leading east into a Germany that was breaking apart, one crossing at a time. And as the soldiers continued to march, their boots echoing across the bridge's trembling frame, Major Anderson felt the weight of it all. The fear, the fatigue, the triumph. The bridge held. The men crossed. The war moved forward. The Rhine, once Hitler's shield, had become the Allies' gateway, and the bridge they built in 10 hours had carried them to victory.